On a freezing night in July 1943, German soldiers huddled in their positions near the Kuban bridgehead heard a sound that made their blood run cold. A soft whooshing noise drifted through the darkness above them, like wind through canvas, followed seconds later by the whistle of falling bombs. Before the anti-aircraft searchlights could illuminate the sky, the attackers had vanished into the blackness, leaving only destruction and fear in their wake. The Germans called them Nachthexen, night witches. Soviet female pilots who flew the most dangerous missions of the Second World War in obsolete wooden biplanes. This is the story of the 588th Night Bomber Regiment, an all-female combat unit that flew over 30,000 missions and became one of the most decorated formations in the Soviet Air Force. Their extraordinary achievements remained largely forgotten for decades, overshadowed by the broader narrative of the Eastern Front. When Operation Barbarossa began on the 22nd of June 1941, the German Wehrmacht crashed into Soviet territory with devastating force. The initial assault destroyed thousands of Soviet aircraft on the ground and inflicted catastrophic casualties on the Red Army. Stalin's forces reeled backward, losing entire army groups and leaving millions of civilians under Nazi occupation. Among those watching the German advance with horror was Marina Raskova, already a national hero, and the first woman to become a professional navigator in Soviet aviation. Born in Moscow in 1912, Raskova had originally dreamed of becoming an opera singer before a middle ear infection destroyed those ambitions. She turned to chemistry and engineering, working in a dye factory before finding her calling in aviation. By 1933, she had become the first female navigator in the Soviet Air Force, a remarkable achievement in a male-dominated field that would establish her reputation across the nation. Raskova's fame grew when she set multiple long-distance flight records in the 1930s, earning her the nickname the Soviet Amelia Earhart. Her most famous flight came in 1938, when she, Valentina Grizoldubova, and Polina Osipenko flew non-stop from Moscow to the Far East, setting a new world record. When their Ant-37 aircraft ran low on fuel, Raskova bailed out to lighten the plane, walking for 10 days through the frozen Siberian taiga before being rescued. The three women became the first female recipients of the Hero of the Soviet Union Award, the nation's highest honor for bravery. When war came, thousands of young Soviet women wrote to Raskova, begging for the chance to fly combat missions against the German invaders. The Soviet military initially rejected these applications, following the widespread belief that women had no place in aerial combat, despite their proven abilities in civil aviation roles. But Raskova possessed something invaluable: personal access to Joseph Stalin himself. Using her celebrity status and her direct connection to the Soviet leader, Raskova lobbied relentlessly for permission to form all-female combat aviation units that could contribute meaningfully to the war effort. On the 8th of September 1941, she delivered a public speech calling for women pilots to be allowed to fight. Exactly 1 month later, on the 8th of October 1941, Stalin issued Order Number 0099, authorizing the formation of 3 unprecedented military units. The order authorized the formation of 3 women's aviation regiments. Not just female pilots, but entirely female units, including navigators, mechanics, armorers, and ground crews. This made the Soviet Union the first nation in history to deploy women in combat aviation roles, with full authorization to engage the enemy. The 3 regiments were designated the 586 Fighter Aviation Regiment, the 587 Bomber Aviation Regiment, and the 588 Night Bomber Aviation Regiment. From over 2,000 applicants, Raskova selected approximately 400 women for each regiment, choosing based on flying experience, education, and physical fitness. Most were young, between 17 and 26 years old, many still students when they volunteered. They reported to Engels, a small town north of Stalingrad, for an intensely compressed training program at the Engels School of Aviation that would test their abilities and determination. What normally took male pilots years to learn, these women were expected to master in mere months. Each recruit trained not just as a pilot, but also as a navigator, mechanic, and member of ground crews, creating versatile personnel who understood every aspect of their aircraft. The male commanding officer at Engels took one look at the new arrivals and immediately ordered them to cut their hair. Long hair, he insisted, was not soldierly. The women could cut it themselves, or military barbers would do it for them, reducing their locks to no more than 2 inches. For many of these young women, whose hair had never been cut in their lives, this was a severe blow to their femininity and pride. Russian women traditionally wore their hair long, often below the waist, and the forced cutting represented a painful sacrifice for their country. After 6 months of intensive training, Raskova assigned the women to their regiments based on their performance and qualifications. The most skilled pilots were assigned to the 586 Fighter Regiment and received brand new Yakovlev Yak-1 fighters, much to the resentment of male units flying obsolete equipment. The second tier went to the 587 Bomber Regiment, flying twin-engine Petlyakov P-2 dive bombers under Raskova's direct command. The lowest-scoring pilots were assigned to the 588 Night Bomber Regiment and given the aircraft nobody else wanted, the obsolete Polikarpov Po-2 biplane. The Polikarpov Po-2 was a design from 1928, originally designated U-2 for Uchebny, meaning training aircraft. These slow, obsolete biplanes were normally used as crop dusters and primary trainers, never intended for combat operations against a modern military force like the Wehrmacht. The Po-2 was constructed of plywood covered with canvas, with an open cockpit that exposed crews to temperatures of -40 degrees Celsius at altitude. Its maximum speed was only 94 miles per hour, actually slower than the stall speed of German Messerschmitt fighters that would hunt them. The aircraft could carry only 350 kilograms of bombs, just 2 small bombs tucked under each wing. There were no radios, no radar, no parachutes until 1944, no guns, no defensive armament whatsoever to protect the crew from enemy fighters or anti-aircraft fire. Navigation equipment consisted of a map, a compass, a ruler, a stopwatch, a flashlight, and pencils. If the aircraft was hit by tracer bullets, the wood and canvas construction would burst into flames immediately, giving the crew almost no chance of survival. The crews received hand-me-down uniforms from male soldiers, including boots, several sizes too large for women's feet. Women stuffed rags torn from bedding into the oversized boots to make them fit, a makeshift solution that left many with blisters and circulation problems during long missions. Despite these handicaps, or perhaps because of them, the 588 Night Bomber Regiment would become the most famous and feared of the 3 female aviation units. The regiment was commanded by Major Yevdokia Bershanska, who would lead it throughout the entire war with exceptional skill and devotion. Unlike the other 2 regiments, which eventually accepted male pilots and crew members due to personnel shortages and the physical demands of their aircraft, the 588 remained exclusively female from formation to disbandment. This was a distinction the women fought hard to maintain, resisting repeated attempts by male officers to integrate their unit. On the 28th of June 1942, the 588 Night Bomber Regiment flew its first combat mission against German headquarters positions. From that night forward, they flew nearly every single night until the end of the war in May 1945, an extraordinary record of sustained combat operations. A typical night's operations would see 42-person crews, each consisting of a pilot and a navigator, flying multiple sorties. Because the Po-2 could carry only 2 bombs, crews had to fly 8, 10, or even more missions each night to have any meaningful impact on German positions. The navigator sat in the rear cockpit with the bombs, responsible for navigation, target identification, and manually releasing the ordnance at precisely the right moment. The pilot concentrated on flying the aircraft, often in complete darkness with only the faint glow of instruments to guide them through the night. The technique the Night Witches developed was as ingenious as it was dangerous. They would approach the target area at extremely low altitude to avoid German radar, which couldn't detect such small, slow aircraft anyway, and to minimize exposure time to searchlights and anti-aircraft guns. Several miles from the target, the pilot would cut the engine to idle, allowing the aircraft to glide silently toward the bomb release point. The only sound was wind whistling through the wooden struts and canvas wings, a soft whooshing noise that would become the signature of their attacks. German soldiers, hearing this eerie sound in the darkness, said it reminded them of witches flying on broomsticks. The nickname Nachthexen, Night Witches, was meant as an insult by German troops, but the women of the 588 adopted it with fierce pride, embracing the fear they inspired. The Germans became so terrorized by these nocturnal attacks that soldiers refused to light cigarettes at night for fear of revealing their positions. Wild rumors spread through German ranks that the Soviet government was giving these women experimental drugs to enhance their night vision like cats. The Luftwaffe High Command was so impressed and intimidated by the Night Witches that any German pilot who shot one down was automatically awarded the Iron Cross. This made the small wooden biplanes among the most valuable targets in the entire Soviet Air Force from the German perspective. The reality was far simpler than rumors of chemical enhancement. These young women flew with exceptional courage, skill, and determination, born from defending their homeland against an invader who had murdered their families and destroyed their homes. Personal motivation drove them to extraordinary feats of bravery. One of the most celebrated Night Witches was Nadezhda Popova, born in December 1921 in Ukraine. She had joined a flight club at 15 and was working as a flight instructor when war broke out, teaching other young people the joy of flight in peaceful times. When German forces invaded her hometown, they murdered her brother and turned her family home into a Gestapo headquarters. Popova watched German pilots strave columns of refugees with machine gun fire, killing women and children fleeing their homes, scenes that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The experience filled her with a burning desire for revenge and an unshakable determination to fight the invaders. She volunteered immediately for Raskova's new aviation regiments, determined to make the Germans pay for what they had done to her family and her country. Popova flew 852 combat missions during the war, including an incredible 18 sorties in a single night over Poland in 1944. On one occasion in 1942, she was shot down during a day reconnaissance mission and crashed near Cherkassk in the North Caucasus region. While retreating with a Soviet motorized column, she met fighter pilot Semyon Kharlamov, who was among the wounded. The two fell in love over shared experiences of combat and loss, and later married. Both survived the war as highly decorated combat pilots. Their wartime romance, a rare bright spot. Another mission saw Popova's aircraft return riddled with 42 bullet holes through the wings, fuselage, map, and even her helmet. Incredibly, neither she nor her navigator were injured, though the aircraft was barely flyable and had to be written off after landing safely at their base. The Night Witches learned to use their aircraft's weaknesses as tactical advantages against superior German equipment. When attacked by fast Mi-109 fighters, they would throw the Po-2 into impossibly tight turns at low speed, maneuvers that modern fighters simply couldn't match without stalling. The German fighters, with much higher stall speeds, couldn't match these maneuvers and would overshoot, forced to circle and try again. The Night Witches would also fly dangerously close to the ground, too low for German fighters to safely follow without risking a fatal crash in the darkness. After repeated failed attacks, frustrated Luftwaffe pilots would usually give up and return to base, unwilling to waste fuel chasing targets they couldn't catch. This defensive technique saved countless lives and allowed the Night Witches to maintain their remarkably low casualty rate throughout the war. The regiment developed a decoy tactic that required nerves of steel and absolute trust between crews. 3 aircraft would approach the target together. Two would deliberately expose themselves to searchlights and anti-aircraft fire, drawing the attention of German gunners away from the primary attack aircraft. While German gunners focused on the decoys, twisting searchlight beams frantically to track the dancing biplanes, the third aircraft would slip through the defenses undetected and deliver its bombs. The decoy crews faced withering fire, twisting and diving desperately to avoid the deadly streams of tracer bullets. One mistake, one moment of hesitation, and the fragile wooden aircraft would explode in flames. The women who flew as decoys knew they were deliberately making themselves targets, sacrificing their own safety so their comrades could complete the mission and strike back at the invaders. The missions took a terrible psychological and physical toll on these young women. Most spent 10 hours or more in the air each night, flying mission after mission in freezing open cockpits, their faces exposed to wind chill that could reach -50 degrees Celsius. The cold was so intense that touching metal parts of the aircraft with bare skin would tear the flesh away. Pilots developed severe frostbite on their faces and feet, despite fur-lined boots and leather helmets. Many suffered permanent hearing damage from the constant engine noise at close range. They returned from missions exhausted, often with only minutes to rest before climbing back into their aircraft for another sortie. The strain of constant combat, sleep deprivation, and the loss of friends created intense stress that would have broken less determined individuals. Despite these hardships, the women maintained remarkably high morale, supported by Bashunsko's compassionate leadership style. Many carried photographs of Marina Raskova in their flight suits as a good luck charm, believing that the founder of their regiment was watching over them from beyond the grave. Tragically, Raskova would not live to see the final victory she had made possible. On the 4th of January 1943, while leading two P-2 bombers to their first operational airfield near Stalingrad, her aircraft crashed, attempting a forced landing on the banks of a Volga river. The entire crew perished in the crash. Raskova was just 31 years old. She received the first state funeral of the war, with her ashes interred in the Kremlin wall alongside other Soviet heroes, a rare honor that demonstrated her importance to the nation. Stalin personally ordered that her 125th Guards Bomber Aviation Regiment be renamed in her honor, ensuring that her contribution to Soviet victory would never be forgotten. The loss devastated the women she had trained and inspired, but they continued fighting with renewed determination to honor her memory. In February 1943, the 588 Night Bomber Regiment was honored with Guards status and redesignated the 46th Guards Night Bomber Aviation Regiment. In October 1943, following successful operations on the Taman Peninsula, it became the 46th Taman Guards Night Bomber Aviation Regiment, a title they would carry through the war. The regiment participated in every major Soviet offensive from 1942 onward, advancing from the Caucasus through Ukraine, Belarus, and Poland into Germany itself. They supported the siege of Sevastopol, the liberation of the Crimea, the advance through Poland, and finally, the assault on Berlin itself. By the end of the war, the Night Witches had flown 23,672 combat sorties and dropped over 3,000 tons of bombs on German positions. They delivered 26,000 incendiary shells and countless harassment missions that denied German forces rest and recovery, contributing significantly to Soviet victory on the Eastern Front. The regiment destroyed or damaged 17 river crossings, 9 railways, 2 railway stations, 26 warehouses, and 12 fuel depots. They also accounted for 176 armored vehicles, 86 prepared firing positions, and 11 searchlights, significantly disrupting German military operations across multiple fronts. The cost was heavy. 32 members of the regiment were killed in action over the course of the war, a relatively low casualty rate that nonetheless represented terrible losses for such a close-knit unit. The most devastating single night came on the 31st of July 1943, when 4 crews were shot down. Despite the losses, The Night Witches achieved a casualty rate far lower than comparable male bomber units flying more modern aircraft. This was attributed to their exceptional flying skills, intimate knowledge of their aircraft's capabilities, and innovative tactics that turned weaknesses into strengths. 23 members of the regiment were awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union, the nation's highest decoration for valor in combat. Dozens more received the Order of the Red Banner, Order of the Red Star, and other combat decorations recognizing their courage and skill under fire. Yevdokia Beshanskaya, who commanded the regiment throughout its entire combat history from June 1942 to May 1945, was awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union. Her leadership kept the unit cohesive and effective through nearly 3 years of continuous combat operations, never losing the respect of her pilots. The Night Witches flew their final combat mission on the 4th of May 1945, just 3 days before Germany's unconditional surrender. When the Great Victory Parade was held in Moscow on the 24th of June 1945, the Night Witches were not invited to participate in the celebrations. The official explanation was that their obsolete PO-2 biplanes were too slow to keep formation with modern aircraft. This decision represented a bitter disappointment for women who had fought so hard and sacrificed so much, excluded from the moment of triumph they had helped create. 6 months after the war ended, the 46th Taman Guards Night Bomber Aviation Regiment was quietly disbanded. The women returned to civilian life with their decorations and memories, but little public recognition or support for the trauma they had experienced during 3 years of combat. For decades, their extraordinary achievements were largely forgotten, even within the Soviet Union. Many worked as flight instructors, continuing to fly but never again in combat. Some struggled with what we now recognize as post-traumatic stress, haunted by memories of friends lost and missions flown. Nadezhda Popova, who survived 852 combat missions, lived until 23, passing away in Moscow at age 91. In her later years, she reflected on the experience of flying through searchlights and anti-aircraft fire, the memories still vivid after more than 6 decades of peace. "I sometimes stare into the blackness and close my eyes," she said in one of her final interviews. "It all comes back to me. The searchlights, the sound of the engine, my friends. We were so young, but we knew what we had to do for our country." Today, the Night Witches are gradually receiving the recognition they deserve as pioneering female combat aviators. Their story demonstrates that courage, skill, and determination know no gender, and that women are fully capable of excelling in the most demanding combat roles imaginable. These young women, flying obsolete aircraft without parachutes or weapons, terrorized the most powerful military force in Europe. They flew more sorties than most male bomber pilots dreamed of completing, night after night for nearly 3 years, never refusing a mission despite the terrible odds. In an era when most nations forbade women from combat roles, the Soviet Union created an all-female combat regiment out of desperate necessity and recognition of capability. Not as a publicity stunt or propaganda exercise, but as a genuine military formation that proved its worth in blood. The Night Witches proved themselves equal to any male combat unit in the Soviet Air Force. Some of their aircraft and personal effects are preserved in Russian museums today as testament to their service, reminders of what these extraordinary women accomplished against impossible odds. But the true memorial to the Night Witches lies not in museums or monuments. It lies in the fact that they helped defeat Nazi Germany, flying mission after mission despite terrible odds, contributing to one of history's most decisive military victories through courage and determination. These women, many still teenagers, left their homes and families to defend their country in the skies above the Eastern Front. They faced death every night, yet continued flying when common sense would have counseled retreat, driven by love of homeland and determination to avenge the murdered. The whooshing sound of their wooden biplanes became the sound German soldiers feared most, more terrifying than artillery or tank attacks, because it came from the darkness without warning. The Night Witches. Nachthexen.